Hello, everyone listening in today. You are all welcome to today's episode of the We Win podcast, powered by Accelerate Her Africa. I am your host, Lolita Ejiofor, and I can't say what a pleasure it is to have you all listening today. We have a special guest, and her name is Anna Insam. Anna is the powerhouse founder who transformed trauma into triumph. As a survivor of gender-based violence, Anna channeled her healing journey into Clio Health, a revolutionary digital health assistant, making family healthcare simple and accessible. With backing from the Delta, acceptance into New York City's prestigious Draper America's Founder Program, and 10 years scaling startups alongside global brands, Anna is living proof that when women elevate, ignite, and navigate with purpose, they change the world. Are you ready to witness pain transformed into power? If yes, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Anna Insam. Hello, Anna. Welcome to the We Win podcast. It's so great to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much, Lolita. I'm really happy to be here with you today.
Before diving into Clio Health, let's talk about your remarkable background. You spearheaded omni-channel marketing strategies at ShopRite Checkers, one of Africa's retail powerhouses, working with iconic brands like Red Bull and PepsiCo. What key insights about creating compelling brands did you take away from working alongside these marketing titans?
I think the most important thing that I learned was being data-driven. And this was a couple years ago. So ShopRite had just pivoted into actually offering sort of strategic insights into their campaigns. So not only were the brands approaching us with these data insights saying this is why we need to run a certain campaign on a certain product to this market segment, but we were able to sort of supplement the data that they had with our own data. And that was really, I think, one of the most important lessons is that we need to be customer orientated. And that has really changed now. I would say you're seeing data-driven marketing everywhere. But a few years ago, that was emerging and we were trying to figure out how to use the data, how to leverage it. And that's number one. And then the second part of it is really to think, how can I translate a certain marketing message to the right medium? So when it comes to omni-channel marketing, you're thinking a customer sitting on their couch at home, they're then driving to work, and then they maybe are stopping at the shops. So there's all these different formats that we need to meet that customer in. And you may have, a segment that you're going after, but you really need to think about the format they're in. Can you meet them where they are? So if someone is driving, can we have sort of a radio ad that speaks to that commute, that feels like it's targeting them at the right time in their day? And so it really is about taking whatever message that brand wants to send to that customer and applying it to the right environment for the best result.
That sounds so fascinating. There's a lot of work that goes into aligning your product and your message to the customers, regardless of where they are and what they're doing. So you specialize in omni-channel and shopper marketing. How has the way big brands connect with customers changed over the last decade? And what do you think they are still getting wrong?
I think that the competition has really increased. So specifically, if you look at the US market, it's almost unbelievable how many products compete in a shopper environment or online that feel that they're almost the same product with these small nuances. And I think the competition increases the more we try to differentiate a product. And I think what's really interesting is that the customers become at the center of everything now. So brands are really having to listen to what their customers are asking for and what they want. And that's, I think, a really big change that we're seeing. So instead of it being so product driven only of what does the brand want to innovate and introduce, that competition has created a reason for these brands to really need to listen to their customers and give them what they're asking for to prevent that brand switching. And the second thing you really see is that brands themselves are becoming a moat. So, think of a water bottle, for example. We get a lot of similar water bottles. So in South Africa, we know that there's a great water that comes from a certain source. People are much more likely to pay more, or people that come from overseas are more likely to pay for the bottle of water that they're used to, even if it comes at a premium. And I think it's very interesting, but like the customer is ultimately king, and the brand association as to what that customer feels towards the brand is having the impact. So the differentiation is not just in the product, etc., but it's what that brand communicates and stands for, and what that individual then decides to kind of go with based on trust and affinity and what they find most important in a brand. So I think brands have more of a personality than ever, and it's larger than life now as to actually fall in love with the brand, not just the product.
Yeah, the brand certainly does evoke some emotional responses, which are nuances that they need to look out for from their customers. So it's quite understandable that brands have to focus on delivering a tailored solution or tailored message in alignment with their brand promise. So after that, you pivoted to the venture builder, the Delta, where you worked with over 20 early stage startups. There you achieved some incredible metrics like building a sales team from scratch and reducing customer acquisition costs by 40% in one quarter. For the founders listening, what is the key to building an effective and efficient sales process when you have limited resources?
So obviously I was coming into the Delta, which was a startup venture building environment, from my days in more omni-channel and shopper marketing. So I'd come from a very structured corporate background and moved into this very agile sort of blank page where no sales process existed, and ultimately only the founder was the one selling our services, and our services were essentially consulting but also product development for startups themselves. So where we started, it was me and the CEO figuring out how are we going to start a sales team here, and we got it wrong a couple of times as well. So I think it's an interesting journey, but you start with what goals do we need this team to achieve. So we're looking to set up a sales funnel. What do we need to achieve? So obviously for us, we had revenue targets, and we wanted to bring down our cost of customer acquisition. So you can see we were tracking that. Right. So we started there, and then we started to have a look at the different individuals you would need. So you think of marketing, number one. So what is our brand saying? Then what is lead generation? So what is happening with actually bringing in those customers? Where are they finding us? How are they meeting us? Do we need to run a campaign? You then look at your customer engagement person. So who's meeting these customers if they do inquire, or if there was a campaign? Who's having that first conversation, and how are we explaining the business to them? What do we need to get out of those early conversations? Right. And then there's obviously landing the client, so closing that sale and closing the deal and putting together a project, all the way through to project delivery. So if you're executing on like an app build, you need to really think about delivering a high quality app that you promised in the sales process. So, those are the first things you want to look at is what do I need? And for other founders listening in and thinking, okay, well, what do I do? Are these the same people? Can one person do all of these roles? Or what are the different roles and skill sets? Because not everyone is good at everything. And you see that, in early stage teams, you often are picking up things that you maybe are not the best at, but that you need to take on. So think about between yourself, the existing team, who you could hire, what is the biggest gap missing, and how could you set that up? Obviously, there would be limitations. Could you have certain tools that you bring into the business as well that could help you that automate certain functionalities? So really think about that, number one. And then you need to do a little bit of a theory and say, okay, so if we ran it like this, maybe let's test it out. So maybe don't go all the way to hiring someone first. Test it out on the internal team and say, okay, this is the lowest, cheapest way to test. Is this really going to work? And, in practice and in theory, you'll actually learn things out of that. So I almost see it like as a startup environment of validating what you need and trying to just run it as quickly as you can to test. And typically the person to look at when it comes to setting these things up is the founder in the startup. So if that's you, you need to think about, how do I sell this business? Because ultimately that's what's been working so far, hopefully. And if that hasn't been working, clearly there's an approach within yourself, maybe not being the best salesperson either, or not the right strategy. But usually if something is working already, you should try to double down on that. So, these early stage startups, you don't want to make really big changes in the beginning. You want to make sure that you're creating something repeatable. So if the founder is now swamped and needing to take a little bit of a step back, which was what was happening at the Delta, you need to be conscious of what are they doing really well and try to replicate that. And I think where we went wrong is kind of going to the structured version of what most corporates would do or larger startups would do before doing that in-between stage. So there was definitely growing pains back and forth. And, I've now left the Delta for about a year, and it's very interesting to see how that model is now working quite well. And it goes back again to the founder and how was Louis selling there. And I think that is really what works, is focusing on what is working for you, listening to the founder and staying close to that. And the last bit of advice is always to be cutthroat. Unfortunately, if the results aren't there, you can't be a head of sales and say, well, someone just needs more time. It's now been 6 months. Or, you've got to make the difficult decisions and have difficult conversations with the team, from hiring, before you bring them in, as to what their expectations are, so that they feel aligned as to they know what the startup needs to deliver, through to the actual team internally. And as a leader, you have to make these hard decisions sometimes to say, this really isn't working. And I'd say those were my 2 biggest learnings out of implementing it ourselves and having some teething pains as well going through it.
That's such a loaded response. There's so much in there. I think what stuck with me most is, if you have something that's working, don't change it, keep going. But also what's important is that no founder is an island. You need to understand your own skill set and be ready to acknowledge that you don't know it all. And you just need to delegate those areas of weakness to people who do know it. Okay. You also created the Global Ecosystem Partnership Program there. What have you learned about the art of building successful relationships? What makes a collaboration truly valuable for a new venture?
So for us, for some context, when we started partnerships, we were thinking of this lead generation side. And we realized that there were a lot of similar service providers, and similar in the sense that they had the same ICP, but they had a different offering. So from a sales perspective, it was smart for us to partner with certain providers that maybe offered like an Amazon subscription, or they could do AI development, something that could plug into what the venture was doing already. So for us, we knew that ventures didn't have a lot of time. So they also didn't have all this time to vet all of these different providers, So if they were already working with us and we could naturally connect them to these other providers and either do some sort of a revenue share or partnership that goes both ways, or if a provider was approached by a startup and they weren't able to actually meet their needs because it was maybe more complex or the Delta was better suited, you'd want that partner to be able to send over that lead and say, well, here's someone trusted that we vetted, that we recommend. And finding those startups in the time of need is obviously quite difficult. So I think that is really where the partnerships began for us. And the Delta has now evolved that into a sort of ecosystem. It's called Apex, where they actually partner with angel investors for deal flow. And it's quite incredible. I think you always just have to think about what is the right partnership for what the business needs at different points. So obviously the Delta has evolved in that sense, and I think I went through that experience. But really what I learned about evaluating partners, which I think applies even now as a founder in my business when I'm looking at who should we partner with, is really number one, the alignment of goals. So do we share the same ICP where, we could both help someone's day get better by using our products together, or they're naturally going to have the same need? As soon as they use our product, they're going to need something else. So if you share that and you share the same goal as that partner, it makes a lot of sense to, don't both go and build something out completely separately. Let's both partner in that instance and use the same bricks of the wall in order to make sure that, our efforts are going to go a bit further. So I'd say that's the first thing I look for, is that alignment. The second thing is definitely this unfair advantage. Right. So as an early stage startup, you don't have a lot of time and there's a lot of competition, of course, and you're very strapped from a resource perspective. So, does partnering make sense to getting to your goal easier? So can you get this unfair advantage, this something special, this secret sauce that will really supercharge what you're doing? And you've got to be really careful to not get distracted, because yes, you can take on partnerships for credibility. Yes, you can take them on in case someone has this need. But you are managing relationships, and you don't want to spread yourself too thin with too many partnerships as well. So I think that you really need to be logical with, is this what we need right now, or should we rather wait a couple of months and partner then when the time is right? Because I often feel that pressure of, it could be something in the future, I'm excited, but is it really helping me right now? Potentially not. And then just pushing that out a little bit. And the last thing would be distribution. So as an early stage startup, we've spoken about competition and how many different brands and companies are competing for your same audience. And distribution is really something that sets a startup apart these days, which is, can you come up with the right partnership where they have potentially thousands or millions of customers, where naturally they would start using your product. So if you're at the top of the recommendation as you sit across from your doctor that day, that's the way you could potentially get into that patient's hands without them even doing research outside of your product, because the doctor recommended it. So you've really got to think about that distribution, and if that's obviously what you need at the time, but that can be really valuable from a partnership perspective. And I think overlaid with all of this is relationship. So for me, I worked at the Delta. The Delta then became my first investor, and they provide services to me in exchange for equity. And that partnership has been invaluable. It ticks all the boxes of what I've needed as a founder, but also from their perspective, because they actually have a studio and they invest in ventures and they focus on early stage. It's been quite a beautiful marriage of sorts, as they say, when it comes to investors and founders in this partnership space. And it's really been, I think, one of the biggest assets as an early stage, because of the access I've then gotten to all of these other items, which is, ecosystem access and advisory when I need it, as well as the other things that I've mentioned. So it really is something that can make or break your business in the early days. And you want to make sure that you're investing in the right people around you in order to make that business as strong as possible at whatever phase you're in.
Yes, so important. I mean, the fact that partnerships are ways of collaborating with organizations that can help you, that can provide you with that leg up. But it's also important to know that you are managing relationships. So I'm learning a lot from this, because it's quite important for people to understand that it's not just the partnerships. It's about managing those partnerships, benefiting from those partnerships, aligning with those partnerships.
Yeah, and I think it's important to not be afraid to ask questions and to ask for advice, whether that's an investor or a friend or other founders, or, just getting different perspectives, because doing things alone is really hard. And obviously as a founder, we take on so much responsibility, but you don't have to have all the answers, and partnerships allow you to have the answers a bit quicker sometimes, or to co-create. And I think that's a really important part of the journey as well.
Yeah. Okay. You've courageously shared that you are a survivor of gender-based violence. And I want to start by acknowledging the strength that it takes. This conversation is not about the trauma itself, but about the journey after. Can you talk about the process of reclaiming your own story and making the conscious decision to speak out?
So I became a gender-based violence survivor in October 2020. So that's a couple of years ago now. And the week that it happened, it was a complete shock to me. So I hadn't been in an abusive relationship or circumstance before. So I was quite privileged from that perspective. And I always thought that I would make smart decisions for myself as someone who's well educated and came from a background where I didn't get exposed to it. You assume that you will make better decisions in partners you choose. So it was a big shock for me and a reality check as to how big the problem of gender-based violence is, because it is something that people don't often speak about and has been a taboo topic, especially 5 years ago. It was something that was shocking to me. And once I got exposed to other survivors and, was thrown into the space of realizing just what a big problem this was and how many women were impacted. So, across the world, it's 1 in 3 women will experience gender-based violence in their lifetime. And in South Africa, the number is about 50%.
Wow.
And obviously abuse can take on many forms, physical, emotional, financial, psychological. There's so many different ways it manifests. And often we try not to identify as potentially someone who's experienced that, because there's shame of saying, I dated someone that I thought I was safe with. And I think going through that experience so quickly, I learned that my abuser had 2 other survivors before me, where charges had been ongoing, but it was all behind many walls. No articles were written online about it. There were no warnings for other women. And I just thought, this is just not right. Number one, that women are ashamed to say that I'm a survivor because of how people then perceive you. But then secondly, for an abuser to just carry on hurting women over and over and it not being out in the open. And I think those 2 things really just made me feel there was actually no other option than speaking out, because I didn't feel ashamed. I felt like I'd survived something really traumatic, and yes, I had made a poor decision in my partner, clearly, and I was lucky that I walked away, that week, immediately. But I just felt that I could be this voice for other people who were having a different experience to me, or who didn't have the background and belief in themselves at the time that I did. So for me, it was quite a contrast to who I was on a day-to-day basis. So I was outspoken. I would, when I'd seen stories like that, I would condemn that kind of action, and I didn't mind sharing my voice in that sense. And I realized that was a slight superpower in that department. So I decided to speak out, and I think that really was the conscious decision of, I'm not letting an abuser narrate my life story, I'm narrating it. And I always use the word, survivor rather than victim, because I think I don't want to feel like a victim, and that's me taking my power back. But it's really been very healing to say I'm really strong for what I've endured. And we went through a 4-year journey to justice, where he was eventually found guilty of assault GBH in South Africa and sentenced to prison. He has since appealed his conviction, though, so he's back out on bail. So he's having to go through the court system again, where they'll review the evidence and hopefully come to the same conclusion. So, it is a complicated and long journey, and I think it's just such an important topic because so many women are experiencing this in silence. And I just really feel that by speaking about these things, they become a lot less scary, and you realize that it could happen to anyone. It could happen to me, it could happen to you. And, how can we band together and create meaningful change? And I think that's where your voice can be really powerful. And that was really my big why, as to if I can just speak out, and that's all I need to do to create positive change for women and for myself and for the system, I'm more than happy to be that person. And I think in the same breath, I obviously found healing on my own journey by doing it in that way. So I think, obviously it had an intrinsic value to myself, but what kept me motivated was how positive the support was, and the kind of positive conversations, even like this, that we're able to have because of it. And I think that more positive comes from speaking about it.
Correct. Oh, wow. I just want to thank you for sharing your personal story with us. Your voice is so powerful. And I know there are women out there that will resonate with this journey, particularly women from Africa who tend to internalize abuse, and they get up every morning, they go to work, and they can't speak about what they're going through. And so I feel like your story would strike a chord with them and make them start to think, wow, there is a way out. I can talk about this. It's not all my fault. And once that starts to happen, you find that a lot of women will stand up for themselves and begin to understand that their journey, they need to take back their power and no longer find themselves in abusive situations and feel that it's normal.
No, of course. And maybe just to add to that, for any woman who is listening and relates to it, it's just that it's never our fault. Obviously we end up in these situations and it is very complex and it's hard to navigate. There's no right answer and there's no right way to approach these situations based on personal circumstance, but all women deserve to feel safe and empowered. And that really is the only message, is to think of, well, how can I feel that way? And if I'm not feeling safe, how do I get to a safer situation and environment, is ultimately what I think women should ask themselves. And I think in South Africa particularly, we have a lot of cultural nuances, like you mentioned, with different religions as well, where it's actually almost acceptable under certain religions, which is a very confusing identity crisis that a lot of women experience. And I didn't have that direct experience, but a lot of the women I've worked with as survivors, have expressed that to me. And I think you've really got to just consider, if you're often wondering, why do women stay, or why is it so complicated? Those things all add different layers. And we really need to be also empathetic that it's not always as easy to just leave the way that I did, and that came from a place of privilege. So really just think about your own circumstance, or how to be more empathetic to those that are in difficult situations and maybe do want different, but are currently unable to make the same choices that maybe I was able to.
I absolutely agree. Thanks for that. In your profile, you state, I know how vital it is to feel empowered in your unique health journey. For those who haven't walked in your shoes, can you describe what that word empowered truly means within a healthcare context? What does the absence of that feeling do to a person, and what changes when it finally presents itself?
I think empowered to me means being able to thrive on a day-to-day basis in your life. So in order to do that, you've got to have a strong physical and mental health status. I really believe that health and well-being is the foundation for everything in our lives. So, as a woman, to be a great, fiance, to be a great daughter, to be a great friend, to be great at work, to be a great founder. I cannot do any of the things that I want to do with my life unless those things are in a good place. Becoming a survivor, obviously, I was in a high-performing job. I had to take off 2 weeks of work, almost 3 weeks, because I was physically unable to be on any sort of meeting or even on a virtual call because I was so injured. And I emotionally was also obviously going through therapy and was in shock and going through a lot. So I think I've really seen what the experience can be like for someone who's having that continuous turmoil, usually at home, and trying to get on with your day-to-day life is impossible. You cannot do both and thrive in a healthy way if you're experiencing any type of assault or even illness. These things can really be detrimental to ourselves. So I think that, the absence means that you cannot achieve your dreams and all the positive things that we do as women specifically. So, if you're a great mother, if you're a great sister, if you're looking after your mum, whatever you're doing, as a woman, that comes with caring for other people or caring for yourself. We can't do that without that health and wellness being that foundation for everything. So to me, I really feel that the presence of it creates this platform for women to do what they want to do, and for us all to benefit off the amazing contribution women have in our lives and economically as well. So to me, I think disempowered is not reaching your full potential, and empowered is feeling, like I'm in control of my body and my story, and I'm able to make choices based on that as to how I want to live my life and, find happiness and joy in the day-to-day.
Yes, I totally agree with you. We as women, we forget we need our own health and well-being to pour into others, to be mothers, to be daughters, and quite rightly understand that we are unempowered when we don't have these things. So you make a very strong case. So now you're pouring all of this experience, professional and personal, into Clio Health. How are you embedding the lessons from your own journey and your advocacy directly into the design of your product? And how can a digital health assistant become a practical tool for safety and empowerment for someone in a vulnerable situation?
It's a multi-layered question. So let me start with why I started Clio. So I obviously went through a really great career in corporate, and I was working at a startup as well. And, working up to kind of, be an exec in a company is what my vision was for myself. And I think what I started to obviously experience this gender-based violence side was this need to really allow people to feel empowered in their bodies. I realized the value of what that brought, and that was a really big passion of mine. So on the one hand, I grew up with two doctor parents who were sort of my companions for educating me and supporting me with my healthcare. And then I had this, gender-based violence experience, and all of that kind of came together into what Cleo is today. And Cleo is for people who feel overwhelmed managing personal and family health. It's a digital assistant to easily manage annual health for everything from your annual checkups like your OBGYN or even your Botox appointment to once-off health events like fertility, surgery, or pregnancy. So something that can stay with you for life every decade, essentially making managing and staying on top of all of your essential health checkups and voluntary things easy. And our vision is to become a family's number one trusted companion for health management, starting with women, because women make 80% of healthcare purchase decisions in the home. And there's a lot of space for women-specific products to come into the market that we're seeing. So we really want to start with her. So obviously, from my personal experience, I had these, innate passions of what I was good at, and I kind of understood partnerships, marketing, sales, how to build a startup, storytelling, branding. And I was really like, how can I bring something to people that are struggling to be empowered in their bodies? Where does that start? And that starts with the health and wellness like we just spoke about. And I think disempowerment looks different for everyone. So, it could be just trying to stay on top of your annual checkups. You've got 6 checkups a year. Maybe one of them is a mammogram, and you're just so busy. You're managing 3 kids and, trying to stay on top of your own health, but you always end up putting yourself last. And you're working and it's intense. That's a lot to experience. It's a lot of mental overload that women and mums who are juggling a career and work are experiencing. Then you could think of someone who's, working or is a stay-at-home mum and potentially has her first child, but she now has a miscarriage. It can be an extreme emotional experience to go through something like that. So I think, disempowerment to me will mean something different to somebody else. And I think health is a vulnerable topic always because it obviously has such an impact on our day-to-day lives and, just being in good health to do things that we want to do, be it exercise or even just get out of bed. So I think that empowerment layer is built into every health experience. So we really believe that health is a unique journey and that you just need the right tools and guidance to manage that. And that's what Cleo is. And we're intentionally for annual health because annual health includes all of these things for women. So for me, it's great that we now have period trackers and, very specific apps coming out that support women in certain parts of our lives. But where I still think the big gap is helping her with that overwhelm as to how to manage all of those different appointments and sort of coordinate her health. So I think for us, we obviously see more of a holistic approach to health and wellness. And that's more about the day-to-day experience of women. So like the small things of getting up in the morning and, am I going to stay on top of what I need to get done? And I experience that myself all the time. I'm like, should I move out this appointment because I've got meetings? So I think really that's where that, day-to-day health comes in. And that's where I see the safety and empowerment happening, is that it's not often this loud sign happening once in your lifetime. It's something that can be there for you more consistently as that companion. So I would say that for me, I'm very blessed that I'm almost part of the target audience of the product. So I understand what it feels like. So when I'm chatting to women, I can understand disempowerment, or I can understand the struggles of working and looking after your health and being in your 30s and 40s and, managing all of these things that come with womanhood. But at the same time, I really listen to our users, and we're now in a beta phase. So we're working with 34 women, all in their 30s and 40s, who've got a range of different things from chronic conditions, IVF, egg freezing, just general health. And they've also helped me along with the way that I'm empathetic to make sure that the tools that we are introducing can be used for any of those instances, because with health you never know what's going to come up. You don't know that you're going to go for a mammogram and the biopsy is going to need to be done and it's all of a sudden it's cancer. So you can't just always be downloading something new. It needs to be something that can grow with you and support you as well. So I think it's that fine balance between solving that need of overwhelm and health, but also something that can work with many different health experiences, creating a continuously empowering experience no matter what positive, high or low you are experiencing along your health journey.
That's great. I just love how the digital health assistant can cut across all stages of life. You mentioned people in their 30s and 40s, and you can go on to say in your 50s and 60s, because as you grow, as women especially, we start to encounter different types of health challenges. And it's also helpful for the mother who's just had a miscarriage. And so it's just useful to know that there is a tool there that can manage your health and give you reminders of things you need to do to check in with yourself and remain on track with your health plans.
Yes. Well, my mother-in-law is also on the platform. Obviously, she's not part of the beta in particular, but it's hard to not want to look after everyone around you that you love. So our go-to-market strategy is just women in the 30s and 40s because of the fertility area that we're focusing on with the egg freezing and the fertility treatments, etc. But we're soon going to expand because, of course, it's relevant to every woman and every man. In all honesty, about 20% of our waiting list is men. Who are just like, I don't have that many appointments, but I already find it so overwhelming and I already get so nervous. So having something that would encourage me and help me stay on top of my health is needed. And I think that's the beauty of how scalable this type of business is, of how many lives you could end up positively impacting. So I'm excited for when it'll be available for your age group as well.
It's very scalable and inclusive as well, because you mentioned men there. We shouldn't forget them. Your mission with Clio is to secure generational health. How does breaking the cycle of violence and trauma for one woman contribute to the health and well-being of the future generations?
So with Clio, our vision of where we're going is that a woman joins Clio, for example, in the family, and she starts managing her health. She potentially gets breast cancer, so she documents what age she got her breast cancer at. So if that's, say, 35, so she was quite young when she was diagnosed and kind of much younger than you would see typically, she records that in her app. She then has her young daughter who grows up, and the young daughter is then able, as an adult, to say, well, I'm now 25. I need to start my breast cancer screening actually at 25, 10 years before my mum had it. So often, you look back and you're like, I think there was this in my family history. I'm a bit uncertain as to what age it was. And often, whatever your direct, relative, if they had something, you are more likely to have it. And that kind of information is really invaluable to set the right screening metrics for yourself and to just be more informed as to the options. So I think, Angelina Jolie is obviously very well spoken about in the space where she had a double mastectomy because she had a certain gene that made her very high risk for getting a certain type of breast cancer. So she was very proactive with it. So I think, these decisions of being able to be more proactive, more informed, knowledge is power, is really something when we talk about generational health, that's something we want to achieve, is that families are able to look after the kids coming after them and things by having a proper health history that's well recorded. Because really the screening frequency would be very different if you didn't know that information, and you could easily miss something like that. I think the second part is that growing up in a household that prioritized mental and physical health is an asset. So if you are a family that is on Clio and you've got this generational health, you're learning tools that are about regulating your emotions. You're learning when you're potentially needing mental health support. So if you think about gender-based violence, for example, it's an unhealthy behavior that occurs in relationships. Yeah. It's something I believe in theory with men, because it obviously is very gender related, is that men don't know how to control their anger and have never known how to deal with emotions correctly. So they're not able to regulate their own feelings and emotions and reactions. And so I think if you're in a household that has Clio and you've got these sort of health and physical, mental health things baked in to how the family is educating themselves, but educating children, I think that it's a really big asset to actually put into families. And that's also generational health, which is like, how are we treating each other? How are we teaching one another to manage our own health? Because ultimately, who really suffers when people get sick, it's the financial burden is often on the family, but the emotional burden is also on the family. So it really becomes an asset just in how we, I guess, build our families as we kind of go through these different decades together. And that's the second way I see it, as being this generational health. It's an asset that you can give your family as to how to look after themselves better and hopefully build healthier habits from young through to obviously as we grow up and sort of evolve as people.
It sounds really intuitive, doesn't it? That you'd want to pass on information from one generation to the next as regarding health. But we find that a lot of people don't have that. And this tool definitely helps to keep that data and that information available. And so that we can learn about where we came from and what sort of illnesses do exist in the family. It's also changing a mindset of how we see health. It's not just about money and treating in the hospital. It's also about the emotional investment in when someone is ill and what it does to a family. So I really appreciate that. That's great.
Yeah. And I think if you think about health as well, like, I was lucky to grow up with two doctor parents. The way I knew about, the HPV vaccination was my dad telling me about it in my lounge. It wasn't exactly the conversation I had with my gynae, which a lot of, I would say, younger women would even avoid going that young. So I think if your parents are not the ones encouraging certain ways of looking after yourself, we just don't learn it anywhere else. We don't learn it at school and we don't learn it in these different formats. And I think Cleo kind of democratizes that information, saying every household can have access to the right information and you can then all make your own decisions and personalize the journey how you see fit. But Cleo provides that sort of basic screening information, telling you, okay, this is what you should be doing for your age and your gender. And I think that's a very empowering moment, that you don't have to have a certain background, upbringing, schooling, or book at home. You can now access that information. And I think that's a really great foundation that hopefully we can add to these other generations.
Yes, definitely addresses a problem. Okay, so looking at the health tech space from a business and technology perspective, what do you see as the biggest opportunity and the biggest threat over the next 5 years?
So in the VC space, you often get asked this question from an investor perspective, and they look for this triangle or triage of opportunity, as they call it. So what are the three things happening in the next 5 years that make you believe that you can deliver on the revenue metrics that you are saying you can when you're asking for investment in a kind of a startup that relies on a lot of funding in the beginning? And the three things that, I've thought really deeply about, the first one from a technical perspective would be AI. So I would say AI is incredible because you can do things that you could never do before. So for example, for us, we can deliver a health plan to you in your 50s, based here immediately, based on a database. And that's a pretty incredible way to cut the clutter for your experience. So I think the ability that it provides from a technical perspective is amazing. It can be a risk, of course, when you look at the different jobs and the landscape and how things are changing. But I see everything as an opportunity. So I think you've got to learn how to use these tools. So don't be afraid of trying ChatGPT and weaving these into your day-to-day life. I think it'll be relevant. I think the human experience is very relevant, but I think you mixing it with AI is what makes AI so brilliant. That's what I see. The second thing is timing. So I think that this preventative personalized healthcare is in demand, but it's now at the start of the curve. So you're seeing that in 5 years' time, the whole healthcare ecosystem is basically being shaken up, where the consumer or the patient is going to be at the center, with government and all these private healthcare providers and clinics kind of being the layer after that, rather than right now where it's just this mixed jumble and you drop the patient in the middle and they're like, I don't know if it's up, down, left, right, I don't know where to go. So you're really seeing that consumers want guidance. They want to be placed and navigated. You hold my hand and guide me, giving me the right things at the right time. Don't just throw me in and get me to guess what's right for me, because information overload is really insane. So I think timing is interesting when you look at this preventative healthcare, because it's an opportunity if you're starting a business in the sector now and you can see that this is only going to increase in demand. And by starting to build now, obviously in 2 years' time, when the demand is really increasing, we'll be able to service every decade, etc., because we've been able to pre-identify that opportunity. So I really see that this more proactive health is something we're seeing, and that's going to go up. And then the third thing I see is more of a trend. So women's health VC investment grew by 55% year on year in 2024. So, it really is what you call a blue ocean strategy when you focus on this area, because there's so much space, essentially. Blue ocean means that there's no competition really yet. It's not as saturated as other markets, whereas red ocean means there's like blood in the water because there's so much competition. So, I really like the comparison, because I think when you see that VC who are looking to return funds in a couple years' time, they're looking to bet their money on the biggest growing, biggest winning horses is ultimately what they're doing with that capital. If they are investing in women's health already as of the end of 2024, it's really an opportunity, and often going into femtech or going into anything women's health, you're explaining to men something that they may not understand regarding women's health, how it's different, cycle tracking. They kind of are always blown away at how big this segment is, because they're not living the experience. And I think that this space is only going to be growing more and more. So of course it is going to become more competitive, which is in a way a threat. But again, it's an opportunity, because we can help more women. We can partner. So I think there's going to be a consolidation of sorts. Instead of having all these individualized apps, I think you're going to see it coming more together. And I think ultimately what underpins all of these items is that things are going and growing and changing quicker than ever. So the speed of change is so fast that as a business owner today, you just have to stay abreast of these trends. You should constantly be looking at what's going on, and are the theories, so the theories I've spoken about now, actually happening? Are they happening quicker or slower? And depending on what that triage of opportunity is, you need to pivot your business as to what is working. So with Delta, if I look back, there was the funding boom that happened. I think it was 2020, or just before COVID was a great time, but there was that funding boom that happened. And then all of a sudden the funding dropped down post-COVID and risk aversion. So things change, and your business has to adapt, and make sure you're just doing that, because everything can be an opportunity if you analyze the market and adjust in the right way. So take advantage of wherever you are. You never know what that's going to look like in a year. So have the plan, but be open to sort of changes. And when an opportunity comes along that's an unmissable one, hold on to it, because it can be the difference, between skyrocketing success and not really making it.
Really profound. And I absolutely loved the blue ocean analogy you gave of the marketplace for women's health. It's just so encouraging to know that there are opportunities there for investment in women's health. And so women, we have a lot of work to do. Okay, finally, for another survivor out there who is perhaps in a silent phase, but has a powerful ambition, what is one piece of advice you would give for taking the first step towards building a venture and a life on their own terms?
So in varsity, I went on a bit of a health journey myself. So I ended up losing a bit of weight, teaching myself how to eat healthily and exercising properly. And I think that journey for me really taught me about self-worth. And it's something you have to nurture, grow, invest in, learn about. As much as I had a great upbringing, it's not exactly something, even if someone is telling you you're doing a great job, I think happiness starts within. So you have to know that you are worthy. And I think my reaction ever since, this period of my life where I really invested in these things of self-confidence and self-worth and believing I can do something, as well as an upbringing where my dad taught me you can do anything you set your mind to. But I think nurturing that within myself as I became a woman was really the game changer for me. So my advice would be to really focus on your inner confidence and believing that you deserve the best, and not being shy of saying that, that you've got standards and there's a way you want to be treated, or there's a life you envision for yourself, and that you're worthy of that. And I think that that's a really important step to do first. And then the second thing is to just start. You're never really ready for literally anything. I tell every day, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is intense. Or I've got this new meeting, or I have to create something for an investor that I've never done before. I think you're constantly putting yourself out of your comfort zone. And the only thing that I did right was I just got started, and I said, well, I want to find a business that I could start that is going to meet my need, my appetite for business growth, but that has a really positive impact on the world and what I really care about. And that really just looked like a decision saying, okay, I'm ready to start. What am I going to do? Okay, I'm going to chat to the Delta, who are obviously venture builders, and I'm going to say, I'd like to be a founder. Like, can you support me? And that's really how it started. And I think it's just being brave enough to take a step, and you carry on doing that every day, even when you're tired. And, you know, when you're like, I don't think this is going so well, whatever it is, you get up and you try again tomorrow. So I think it's just about that continuation of just keep trying and just start. You've got to be in the game in order to win it. And I think as women, we often don't see ourselves as entrepreneurs because we didn't grow up in households where potentially a woman was an entrepreneur. So we're so used to seeing men be the ones, you know, as CEOs and all these other kind of big positions. And, you know, I would even say myself, I did not see that until I was at the Delta. And it took me a few years to really get that mindset together. But just starting was really the most important thing. So that would be my word of advice for any woman who's looking to start, doesn't know where to start. And I guess if you don't know where to start, then start researching. So you mentioned that just now, you know, invest time in researching what you're passionate about, or go to talks about something you're passionate about. You've got to just start spending time committing to this thing, even if you don't know what it is yet.
Oh my goodness, you've hit the nail on the head. That research into what you want to do is really important, and spending time, even if you don't know what it is exactly, will help you and guide you. And you said something really profound. Know you are worthy. That resonates with me. Anna, I'd like to say a huge thank you for your time today. It's been so insightful. All the information you've shared is so incredibly profound, and I really look forward to having you again on the We Win podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Lolita. It's been incredible, and I hope that every woman listening feels a little bit more empowered today and inspired to do something for themselves in their own lives. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. Guys, I hope you all found this episode both insightful and encouraging. We need to be aware that preventative, personalized healthcare tools are out there, and they're leading changes into how we see our health. No matter how old you are or how healthy you think you are, your health is a form of empowerment. You must also know that you are worthy, and focus on your inner confidence and not being shy to proclaim it. Let's shine, ladies. Thank you all once again for joining us today on the We Win podcast, and I hope you have a wonderful, healthy day.